ODT TV. ODT TV.
The 1985 Disney production Return to Oz is described by many critics as one of the most terrifying children's movies ever made. While many of its scenes are indeed pure nightmarish for young minds, there is one fact that is even more disturbing. The movie is actually about a young girl being subjected to a sadistic world of trauma-based mind control. When Return to Oz was released in 1985, the movie received a somewhat cold reception. While viewers were expecting a sequel to the 1939 classic The Wizard of Oz, the movie ultimately delivered a much darker experience. While The Wizard of Oz features munchkins singing about lollipops, Return to Oz features Dorothy being taken into a grimy mental hospital, strapped down to a bed, and then being electroshocked. And then things get worse. Described by one movie critic as bleak, creepy, and sometimes terrifying, Return to Oz is one of these movies that makes one wonder why they were marketed to children. However, when one understands the hidden underlying meaning of the movie, things begin to make more sense. The movie is secretly about trauma-based mind control, the most sadistic practice known to man, so those behind it probably took sadistic pleasure in scaring young viewers around the world. Return to Oz symbolically describes the horrific process of trauma-based mind control, as experienced by a young girl. Also known as MK Ultra, mind control is about subjecting victims to trauma that is so intense it causes them to dissociate or disconnect from reality, as a response mechanism to protect their conscious mind. The slave's handler then creates a programmable alter persona he can manipulate. If you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, do a little research on the origins and techniques of monarch mind control. Through fantasy, Return to Oz describes the programming process of a young girl that has dissociated from reality into a world created by her handler. According to author Fritz Springmeier, the original Wizard of Oz was used in MK Ultra as a programming tool on mind control slaves. The same way Dorothy goes over the rainbow to escape the land of Oz, MK slaves who are brutally tortured are told to go over the rainbow and dissociate from reality and escape the unbearable trauma. While the Wizard of Oz was chosen and twisted to become a programming tool, Return to Oz was custom made to become an ode to mind control. Based on L. Frank Baum's The Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz, books 2 and 3 of the series, the Disney production added several key elements to the tale to make it about mind control. For instance, in the books, Dorothy is not sent to a psychiatric ward to get electroshocked. Why was this unsettling bit added to the movie? Return to Oz follows the same basic script as several other movies used in mind control, such as Alice in Wonderland, Labyrinth, and even Coraline. An inquisitive young girl escapes reality to explore a fantasy land filled with fun and adventure, where no rules apply. However, in the world of mind control, or MK Ultra, that fantasy land is actually a symbol for dissociation, the place where the mind escapes in order to cope with the trauma. The movie begins where the Wizard of Oz left off. Dorothy is in her room and keeps thinking about the magical land of Oz. Auntie Em is concerned because she hasn't been able to get a good night's sleep. What does she do about the situation? She decides to bring her to a therapist who specializes in electroshocking his patients back to reason. That's great parenting right there. Before Dorothy leaves for the ward, she finds a key with the symbol for Oz. It represents the key to her core personality, her true self. At the clinic, we see the Dr. Whirly holding the key. This represents him taking over the mind and becoming her MK handler. Dr. Whirly tells Dorothy, "I know exactly what will cheer you up," and presents to her his electroconvulsive therapy machine, ECT for short. Dr. Whirly tells Dorothy that his machine has eyes and a mouth. This foretells the fact that this machine will become an actual character in the twisted world of Oz, the world Dorothy will be taken to while dissociating. While looking at the machine, Dorothy sees a reflection of another girl. The electroshock machine is a gateway to her alter persona, Ozma. The head nurse, dressed in a creepy black dress, walks Dorothy to her room. As Dorothy walks down the scary hallways of the institution, we can hear patients screaming and lamenting. This place is nothing less than an MK Ultra programming site. Mind control didn't even exist in the 19th century, the time period where the movie is set, and the entire part of the movie was added by Disney. After being kept in isolation for a while, Dorothy is forcibly strapped to a bed. Dorothy is taken to a room where the head doctor, aka head handler, is waiting with his ECT machine. Dorothy is then prepped for electroshock. Dorothy, however, appears to be lucky. Right when Dr. Worley turned on his ECT machine, the power goes out. At this point, we are under the impression that Dorothy avoided being electroshocked due to a perfectly timed power outage. However, as the rest of the entire movie will clearly tell us, this is not the case. Dorothy did unfortunately get electroshocked, but it is subtly implied. In fact, the shock was so violent and intense that it caused her to dissociate from reality. The lights going out in the room symbolize her core personality going out. From this point on, Dorothy's adventures actually represent her going through the motions of mind control programming while being completely dissociated. What happens to Dorothy immediately after the blackout is relevant. Dorothy's alter persona appears out of nowhere to retrieve her. When Dorothy asks Ozma about the people she hears screaming, Ozma replies that they are patients who have been damaged and locked in a cellar. In other words, they are MK Ultra slaves. Ozma leads Dorothy to the land of Oz, which represents the inner psyche of the dissociated slave. Completely created and manipulated by the handler, Oz causes Dorothy to be a stranger in her own mind. The things she sees and perceives are a thoroughly distorted version of the reality lived by Dorothy at the mental institution. Several clues indicate that despite being in the land of Oz, Dorothy is still physically in the mental institution. First, all of the people we see in the institution exist in the land of Oz, as a crazy, scary version as perceived by an MK Ultra slave who has dissociated. The head nurse of the institution becomes Mombi, the evil witch in the land of Oz. The male nurse who tied down Dorothy to the bed is a Wheeler in Oz. The head nurse is the Grand Dame of Illuminati mind control, a twisted, sadistic, motherly figure. The male nurse is a secondary programmer who is often in charge of torturing and traumatizing the victim. For this reason, he is perceived as the head of the Wheelers. This thing pops out of nowhere, accompanied with a loud sound, a great way to give children nightmares. Dr. Worley is the Gnome King in Oz. In mind control terms, Dr. Worley is the chief handler, the main programmer of the MK slave. For this reason, Dorothy perceives him as the Gnome King. He rules the land of Oz because he rules the mind of Dorothy. There are more clues indicating that Dorothy never left the institution. The implication of these clues are rather sad. The friends she makes in Oz are actually objects seen around the institution at the beginning of the movie. For instance, her best friend in Oz is actually the ECT machine. The movie clearly links TikTok and the ECT machine by focusing on their winding up keys at different points in the movie. TikTok was part of the original book written by L. Frank Baum, but the link with the ECT machine was added by the good people at Disney, who were obviously intent on giving this story a disturbing MK Ultra twist. The pumpkin in Dorothy's room in the clinic becomes her friend Pumpkinhead in Oz. After fleeing the institution with Ozma, Dorothy ends up in Oz, Oz representing her inner world, her psyche as a dissociated MK slave. As a stranger in her own head, Dorothy is constantly watched the same way MK slaves feel watched at all times. In the land of Oz, rocks, walls, and everything else have eyes. They constantly spy on Dorothy and report back to the Gnome King. Dorothy quickly finds the all-important Yellow Brick Road, which led her to the Emerald City. In the world of mind control, the Yellow Brick Road is the path laid out by the handler for the slave to follow during programming. The Yellow Brick Road leads Dorothy to an abandoned place where everybody is turned to stone. Bringing the land of Oz back to life becomes Dorothy's mission, and that's what her handler wants her to do. After shaking off the creepy Wheelers, Dorothy enters the castle of Mombi, the evil witch. Dorothy's encounter with Mombi implies that Dorothy is being programmed by the head nurse in the clinic. The entire castle is plastered with mirrors. The castle represents the inner world of the MK slave that is programmed to mirror itself. Mombi shows Dorothy her collection of heads and takes off hers. Mombi selects a new head. Not only is this a nightmarish scene for children, it is pure MK symbolism. The collection of heads represents various alter personas that can be programmed into the slave. After her traumatic encounter with Mombi, Dorothy escapes the mirrored castle. She is ready for the final stage of her programming, dealing with the Gnome King. The Gnome King lives in a dark underground cave, which indicates how deeply he is ingrained in Dorothy's inner world. At first, he appears to her as a rocky face in the wall. As the handler, he makes all of the rules in the inner world and controls its structure. We see him tearing down walls, creating doorways, and summoning all kinds of things. Like a true handler, he begins by displaying a reasonable and even compassionate side. The Gnome King tells Dorothy, "I know just the thing to cheer you up," which is the same thing Dr. Whirly told Dorothy before showing her the ECT machine. Like a true handler, the Gnome King proposes a game to Dorothy, which is yet another way to further programming. As the game progresses, the Gnome King separates himself from the walls and becomes more human. However, the Gnome King's patient and reasonable side doesn't last very long. Like a true MK handler, once the game is over, he turns into a terrifying monster who has the power to destroy the slave's entire being. As the Gnome King turns into a giant monster, he tears down all of the walls of the cave, turning it into a fiery hellhole. We are symbolically witnessing Dorothy undergoing intense trauma by her handler. Dorothy manages to escape the cave and manages to bring the land of Oz back to life. But did she defeat her foes? While it appears to be the case, she actually only followed the script of her programming. The ultimate goal of IMPK programming is the split of the core personality into alters, and that's exactly what happens. After defeating the Gnome King, the entire land of Oz takes life. While it appears to be a good thing, it actually represents Dorothy's dissociative mind becoming fertile soil for the programming of alter personas. During the celebrations, Dorothy faces a mirror and her alter persona Ozma appears to her. Seeing a different person in the mirror is a powerful MK symbol. We see it several times during the movie. As Ozma walks out of the mirror, she becomes real. Dorothy's programming is complete, and Ozma, her programmed alter persona, is fully present in her mind. Ozma tells Dorothy, "I will look in on you from time to time, and if you wish to return to Oz, I will make it so." In other words, Ozma is now a part of Dorothy's being, and she can return to the land of Oz, dissociation, at any time. Back in Kansas, Dorothy understands that while she's back in reality, her programming is still within her. While staring at another mirror, Dorothy sees Ozma, the alter persona that is part of her life forever.